Hello, everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I know it has been a long time, and I really hope that all of you are doing well. Recently, we got the news that the 12th boards have finally been cancelled. I think it's a big relief for all the 12th graders. This made me think about the education in India. We all have had our fair share of experiences when it comes to school. All of us have had teachers that we very vividly remember. And looking at how the education industry is proceeding, we all have questions. I too. So I thought, who better to put some light on these questions than an educator who has been responsible for handling various school initiatives and strategic projects. So today, we have Mr. Vishnu Karthik with us, the director of Heritage Group of Schools. He was the head of the senior school of the Gurgaon campus. He was also a grade 9 and 10 economics teacher and a trekking instructor. Among his other administrative responsibilities, Mr. Vishnu is keenly interested in building instruction leadership capability, college placements, student leadership development, adolescent coaching, authentic assessments, and a more profound learning curriculum. Before working in schools, he was a management consultant and has worked with organizations like Accenture, Right Management and Leadership Development, Organization Change Management, Learning Design, and has delivered projects in India, the United States, Southeast Asia, and Europe. An alumnus of Harvard University, he's personally passionate about cognitive neuroscience, project-based learning, and incubating experiential learning. I want to welcome him warmly. Sir, thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you so much, Gurjit, for giving me this opportunity to be a part of this YouTube channel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. So now I want to get into the interview. I want to start with the questions. So the first question that I have, earlier the standard of education that was provided in school wasn't as good, and predominantly people would be studying at government schools. Slowly, we saw a change in that. Many today are education in good private schools. What do you think has caused this?
See, first thing, I'm not so sure whether education in the past was anyways inferior to what it is right now. If you ask me, I think things have gone worse with time because of the pure increase in population itself. We must remember having a large public school system, a system run by the government, free education, etc. It's a very expensive proposition. Only the developed nations have actually achieved it. For a country like ours, with over 200 million children, and with about 20 million children being born every year, we actually produce one Australia every year. Just to put that in perspective, to create an education system to educate one Australia every year after year after year, it's a mammoth task. So naturally, so the quality of the government schools over time did fall tremendously. For lack of budgetary allocations, lack of quality teachers, lack of good infrastructure, and things like that. There are some wins we have got. For example, in the last 10 years, the number of children in schools has increased tremendously shot up. For example, about 95% of our primary kids will be in school. 99% of children in this country will find a school in a 5-kilometer radius. So these are tremendous milestones this country has met, and that's not a small achievement at all. But the problem is, once children come into school, do they learn? That's $1 million question. I don't think that's happening enough of it. So we have achieved enfranchising children into school. We've achieved higher enrollments. That's the first stage of our development. But the second phase of development is, now that we got kids into the classroom, are we ensuring they're going to learn or not? That's not happening enough in it, and several reasons into this. The reason a lot of parents have increasingly moved to private schools is because I think there is a perception among parents that between a government and a private school option, the better option is private schools because there's better accountability. Like, for example, in a government school, if the teacher doesn't turn up, there's nothing the parent can do.
Yeah.
But in a private school, the teacher doesn't turn up, the parent can go complain, have a choice to shift to another school. So there's a certain pressure on the school and the teacher to deliver. And that's one of the reasons why you've found the last 10 years, a substantial portion of parents, even if they are poor, they might be at the lowest strata of the society. They might just be earning, 500 rupees a day, or even less than that. They'll still opt to go to a private school because they feel there is better bang for the buck, there is better accountability. Another important reason why parents choose to go to a private school is emphasis on English. And English in our country, fortunately or unfortunately, is a ticket to social mobility.
Yes,
That's another reason why people go. But having said that, it doesn't mean private schools quality is higher than the government school. There is no data that tells you barring the top private schools in big cities, much of the private schools may not necessarily be providing high quality education the way parents would like it to. That's another drawback also which we have in our country.
That's true. All right. I agree. That's true. Moving on to the second question. During the current pandemic, we have seen that schools have shown the agility to go remote or online. So a lot of classes have obviously shifted online. Now we had, like me also, I also had online classes this past year. So do you think some of these changes will be sustained even once we fully recover from the pandemic?
It's a great question, and that's a question a lot of educators around the world are debating about. So what is the post-COVID world looks like for children in K to 12 schools? The answer I think is I think COVID has created a great excuse for bringing in what we call hybrid learning.
Yes.
In other words, using technology to significantly improve student learning, student engagement, etc. So there's a lot of pluses, advantages of technology. But for any uptake in technological change, uptake in technology usage, there should be a certain shock which a society has to go through. People in your generation might not remember, but the last time this happened was in the year 2000. There's something called the Y2K virus, which is supposedly going to come in, which is when the year changed from 99 to 2000. There was something called the Y2K bug which needs to be sorted out. And I vividly remember a lot of the global companies started looking up to India to come up with the Y2K solution for the Y2K bug. And that crisis actually led to the creation of today what we know as top technology companies from India. So that Y2K bug forced global corporates to change their habit of finding a local or an American European technology company as against focusing on an India-based technology company. So a lot of outsourcing started happening back then. Another case is demonetization itself, that a lot of use of digital wallets as against actual physical cash happened because of the 2018 demonetization which happened in this country. Similarly, I think the COVID situation, the shutting down of physical classrooms, will force educators, parents, and students to adopt a lot of new hybrid learning practices. Some of them, for example, is that we should not be using assessments during physical classes. You can actually do assessments at home. Similarly, consumption of content and curriculum itself need not happen in a classroom. Students can do this on their own, in their own personalized timing, etc. Collaboration is far more possible now, like it's small group work, which is possibly not possible to do in a physical classroom because you have a constraint of a timetable. There is a start time and an end time. But in a digital world, you probably, like now we are thinking of having formative assessments on Saturdays and Sundays, etc. A lot of parent collaboration, which usually used to happen in school time, now happens on after school time, on a time which suits most parents, etc. So I think a lot of those things will happen post COVID. So even for a school like Heritage, post COVID, we will still have a lot of the remnants of what we're doing right now in hybrid learning, and that's a good thing. Yeah.
All right. Actually, it has actually led to a lot of conversation between, parents and teachers also. Earlier, the contact used to be minimal because conversations could happen only via mail, or otherwise you had to come in person and meet. Like I remember, parent-teacher meetings also used to be in person, and sometimes parents could not make it. And now, because it was digital this past year, it was also easy to look at the timings, and there was a medium. You could just open your laptop when you're at work also and then attend the PTMs.
That's right. Yeah. Another important thing which just happened, just to add on to your point, the point you just made, I think this is the first time in the history of mankind that parents have a chance to see what's happening in a classroom.
Yeah, that's true.
That has driven a lot of accountability of parents from schools, from teachers, etc., which is a very good thing. Yeah.
Yes, that's true. Moving on, now my next question is related to technology. We see technology is transforming the world. It's transforming the whole world today. How do you see the emergence of technology such as AI, artificial intelligence, and ML, machine learning, shaping the education of the future? How do you think they have a big what kind of a big role do they play?
See, one of the things is that a lot of the tasks which we normally expected a human to do with AI, machine learning, uh, some of those things will get very redundant.
Yes.
And that's a reality. So we often tell parents and students that, hey, for the jobs which are available today will not exist
Yeah.
5-10 years from now.
Yes.
Even a lot of the teaching work, you may not need a teacher in a few years from now.
Yes.
You need good facilitators, you need good assessors, but a lot of the teaching work can just get autonomous, etc. Like we were right now implementing a product, a AI platform to improve pronunciation and comprehension skills in young children when they start reading literature text. Earlier, what used to happen is that when a child reads, the teacher observes and gives feedback. But today, because of AI and ML, the system is learning with every time a child speaks into the system, and the system starts giving feedback on what is the child doing right and wrong. Uh, and we have implemented it this year, and it's led to significant saving of time. It doesn't replace a teacher, of course, a lot more than what a machine should be doing, but it's definitely saved a lot of time for the teacher. So our view is it's going to increasingly change the way we live our world, live our lives, and that's true of learning and teaching as well. But having said that, the promise of AI and ML is still into the future. I still feel that some of the technologies based on AI and ML is fairly rudimentary. It's still not delivered what it could do. And I think we're still about 2 to 5 years away from seeing any material impact, at least with respect to K-12 schools are.
All right. Moving on to my fourth question. You know, now I would like to touch upon a topic which might be a little controversial or as such, but I really want to ask, to be very honest, as noble as it may seem, education and schools are also a business, right? Many they are. You obviously are providing education. It is all about education at the end of the day, but it also is a medium. It's of business, right? So how does one distinguish between the moral and the financial responsibility that they have?
It's a great question, but there are multiple questions in the same question. So to begin with, I wanted to know what is wrong with running a business.
There's nothing wrong.
Uh, yeah, so if there's nothing wrong, then what is the moral contradiction? A business is as ethical as it can get. There is a stakeholder, and there is an institution which provides that. And as long as the institution is accountable to the stakeholder, and the stakeholder is willing to pay a value for the services rendered, what's wrong with that? So the first thing I want to question is that why is running a business seen as a moral contradiction to the noble thought? So, in my view, running an ethical business is as ethical as it can get. There is no moral contradiction about it. That's one. Second, I don't think schools are still. So that's one aspect of for young audience who's going to see this channel. It's important to question that thought that why would running a business evil? In fact, this is one of the biggest challenges in our own country.
Yeah.
If you go to the West, it is a no. It is the society in the West appreciates businessmen and value creation, wealth creation as part of the national identity. So part of the American dream, for example, is to start businesses, create wealth, create jobs, and it is seen as a noble thought. So noble thought actually comes from business. Unfortunately, in India, one of the reasons why we as a nation is a poor nation that we've never embraced wealth creators. We always saw wealth creation as something evil, something which is not noble, something that is a contradict of values. So I really hope with your generation that mindset changes. Wealth creation is such a noble thought, especially when you have so many people under poverty in this country. If we do not look up to wealth creators, then we'll never be able to create wealth for people to step out of their poverty.
Yes.
So, first thing first, doing business, an ethical business, uh, is important, and there's nothing contradicting with any values or any moral compass. That's one. Second part of the question is school at all, if at all, is a business? Uh, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I would like it to, if you ask me, because it'll allow young people like you, for example, to take the entrepreneurial risk to start a school tomorrow. It'll have a million such people like yourself tomorrow. After you finish your graduation, you want to give something back to society, create wealth in the process, provide job. For example, the heritage schools give jobs to over 1,000 people.
Yeah.
And you multiply that into four. That's the average size of an Indian family. 4,000 people every year depend upon the school institution. If it had not been there, what would they be doing? So wealth creation is an important, job creation is an important part of the society. But our schools, businesses, actually, unfortunately, not yet, because schools are still in this country a not-for-profit entities. They're not allowed to legitimately do businesses the way other institutions operate. So my desire is one day this country wakes up to the fact that you need entrepreneurs like yourself, young people to get in and take risk and set up institutions so that it can not only provide quality education, but also provide employment and create value and create tax revenues for the government. In it. Like I said, there are 20 million children born every year. So which essentially means we need at least 2 lakh schools every year, which means that we need 2 lakh entrepreneurs setting up schools every year.
Yes.
So that's one of the largest opportunities we have. So if we don't create entrepreneurs in the field of education, this country is doomed. Where are those children going to go? You and I know that quality schools are far and few in this country.
Yes.
You and I know you wish there are more schools around the country in it, where children have an access to quality education at a value for money price.
Exactly. That is one problem. We have quality education, but the price that is charged might be a lot for many people. So for people like us, it might not be a very big issue because we belong from a family where we can afford this education. But I think we need more institutions that provide this level, but at a very minimal rate. And that is possible to a little extent because of the RTE, Right to Education Act, but still it's not as much as, it
No,
was.
so I just want to add one more thing. Prices come down not because of an act.
Yeah.
Prices always come down because of competition.
Hmm.
So think about it. When I started my career 18 years back, and I'm from the south of this country, and my first posting was in Delhi.
Yeah.
This was 18 years back. No, not 18, 15 years back. The price of a ticket one way, Air India was, and those years called Indian Airlines, a domestic circuit, it's 10,000 rupees. 15 years back, that's almost 1/3 of my pay I had to pay out for a one-way flight ticket. 10,000 rupees. And for lousy food, terrible service, but that's the only thing. There used to be 3 flights between Chennai and Delhi.
Yeah.
That's it. Today, I can fly if I plan my tickets well. Today, 15 years hence, with the 7% inflation, I can get a ticket for 3,500 rupees in a world-class service.
Yes.
And I want to go fly really fancy like a Vistara, I can still get a ticket for 4,000 rupees.
Yeah.
It's not government diktat which made the prices low.
Yeah.
It's competition makes the prices low.
Yes.
So if you allow more schools to come, automatically prices will come down.
Yeah.
So in a city like Gurgaon, for example, you can see the entire range of prices. You can have schools as cheap as 500 rupees a month to as high as 50,000 rupees a month.
I think in India, at least, I think the education level and the kind of education that is provided in the school is also somewhere dependent upon the fees, because for schools that actually charge 500, so the level of education is also very low. Therefore, I think there's a big disparity and
Hmm.
the lack of talent then. Okay, moving on. When we talk about
But
heritage,
you know, but if there is competition, Gurjot,
yeah,
even in a 500 rupee school, there are schools which do really well. There are schools that produce kids into IIT. There are schools that produce give them exceptionally good skills. Of course, there is a big difference in terms of infrastructure, quality of teachers, etc.
yes,
But many of learning outcomes, even in private, but there's adequate research to tell you. I can give you 5 or 6 names in the country. Even at a low price point, they've been able to deliver much more than what even a free government school would do.
yeah,
That's because of competition. Because the owner of that school would know that if I don't deliver for my kids, the parent will shift that kid somewhere else. So
yes. All right. Moving on, I would like to talk about our school. So, the school heritage, it has been a proponent of experiential learning for many years. You know, the entire fundamentals of the school is experiential learning. It's now part of the name also. Um, can you tell us about some advantages that you see with such a pedagogy and how such systems can be rolled out to primary schools in smaller villages across the country so that more people are able to gain such education, and what will it take to see that happen in the future?
So again, a very good question, Richard. So let me not get into the jargons of experiential learning, project-based learning. There are technicalities. So, but just look at life. How is life exists? Life exists within the silos of subjects.
Yes.
Life exists as opportunity to do multiple drafts, iterations. Like for example, as you're doing this interview, with every interview you get better and better and better,
Yes.
right? But that's how life is. But unlike in an exam, there's one final exam, you get it right or not right, right? Again, in real life, you actually have an opportunity to collaborate, right? So those are some of the things when you look at life, how life is. You want a good school should prepare children for that life.
Yeah.
And if you want to prepare children for that life, you have to imitate or in some way create simulations of that life into the classroom.
Yeah.
And that is why a project-based learning school
Yeah.
is helpful, because what does project-based learning do? It essentially simulates how real life is
Yeah.
into small capsules, manageable capsules, and help children to build specific skills. That's what project-based learning is, and that's why we are big proponents of it. Of course, a lot of other reasons also, like for example, I have a cognitive neuroscience background. Essentially, my background is understanding how brains develop and how do they best learn. But today, a lot of neuroscience tells you also that children who experience a project-based learning curriculum are far better off in terms of their own cognitive goals, the way the brain develops, the way it learns, etc. So first thing first, I think is now research. When we started, we never had so much of research 15 years back, but today we know a project-based learning has a lot of research. Research tells you that it's a better curriculum as against a standard test-based traditional education, which much of children in this world go through. Your second part of the question is how do you ensure that it goes to every school, specifically primary schools in villages, etc. You know, one of the good things of project-based learning school, this one is curriculum, is not that it's not expensive. All you need is to allow the world to come into the classroom. So there have been multiple schools around the world who are village schools, but they're far more hands-on in their curriculum. For example, rather than having children sit in a classroom and keep write A, B, B, C, C in a 4-line notebook or memorize tables, allow children to play, do projects in the farm, be close to farm animals, for example, understand how life cycle works by observing things outside. And by the way, project-based learning did not develop in city schools. It did not develop in privileged, expensive schools. They actually developed in very uh, you know, grounded, earthy communities.
Yes.
Mahatma Gandhi, for example, a lot of us know him as a politician, a freedom fighter. But before he got into politics, he actually ran schools and ashrams.
Yeah.
He's published several philosophies around education. His book, Naiv Talim, uh, is around his own experiments of schools in a village and how children learned by doing there in it. Montessori, for example, Waldorf schools, for example, these are all schools set up in a village community. Uh, and how children in those village communities learned by doing. And even now, several parts of the country, there are village schools which is more hands-on and project-based than heritage schools can be. At least in heritage, there are restrictions in terms of safety, security. You really can't get kids out. We're also in a city like Gurgaon, which is not easy to get children out. But if you live in a village, if heritage had been in a village, we would have done far more project-based learning than what we could have done in a Gurgaon city.
That's true. All right, moving on. Now, there are many sources that are available for education or knowledge gain. Now we see that uh, knowledge available so freely on open sources today, and there's been an emergence of various learning platforms like I talked about Coursera and Academy, um, etc. Byju's, Merit Nation. These are certain platforms that are available. How do you see education providers will be able to navigate these changes and still keep themselves relevant, especially when employment of the future will be around specific skills, and such skills can be gained through you know uh, capsules of vast amount of information available, which is mostly free. So how do you think that education that is provided in schools can still be of great relevance when it comes to such platforms existing?
Again, a great question. So clearly, in the last 5 years, we have seen the what I call the democratization of education itself. So earlier, if you really want to have access to quantum mechanics, you got to go to some top university in the world to learn that, or to even have access to an industry expert or a domain expert who will be a professor in one of these schools. But because of technology, because of some of the like MOOCs, for example, there is a huge access to knowledge wherever that might be. So now a lot of people who are willing to learn can learn on demand learning. So that's happening, and that's not just happening in higher education; it's happening all across, etc. For example, tuitions used to be the thing in my time, but today with the rise of Byju's or some of such after-school support platforms, you don't need a tuition teacher in that sense. Or if the tuition teacher is there, the tuition teacher is earlier defined by 3-4 kilometers within where the tuition teacher was based. People used to cycle into the tuition teachers' homes. But today, the teacher can stay anywhere and probably reach out to a million students in any part of the world. I believe there are many Indian teachers are actually tutoring American and kids from the Western world. So those are some of the things which has happened. Uh, but let's also keep in mind, as much as MOOCs enrollments have gone up, the completion rates of MOOCs is abysmally low still.
Yeah.
You still have only about 3-4% of people actually finish what they've started.
Yeah.
So that's one needs to get into human psychology of why this is happening, and that is why the role of schools will still remain. So the role of schools will change from content provider to a facilitator.
Yeah.
So that's why schools like heritage schools, just focusing on project-based learning, will always thrive, because heritage schools sees itself as a facilitator rather than the transmitter of knowledge. We don't claim that we have all the knowledge. We're just going to help kids figure out how to find the knowledge, but we're going to help children be engaged with that knowledge to build it even further. So the purpose of schools like heritage is to help students stick on, complete projects, complete the learning cycle, for example, with the knowledge available outside. And that's going to happen to universities also. Universities will not claim that they have the best professors, but they will definitely can claim that we are the best community.
Yes.
Community of learners, professors, industry collaborators, research experts, etc. So somebody is going to bring everybody together for the student to advance their learning.
Yes. I also think that schools have a very important part. So, like you mentioned, people would really just drop what they're doing halfway. But when you actually are in school, you have teachers around you, even though you might not want to work, but then obviously there's one push that you get, and then we're actually able to get through. Now, if you only have education via these platforms, then half of us will not be as well educated as we are today. Because teachers do have a very human impact, is also something that's very prominent. And it's
Yeah, but it's a great point, Gurjot. Almost 100 years back is when this theory came that learning is a social function.
yeah,
Vygotsky from Russia, as well USSR, came up with this theory. But now today, research tells you that he was right, that learning is a social function.
yes,
And we don't learn in vacuum. We always learn in context with the people with whom we learn.
yes.
So the existence of a teach, not just teachers, but even fellow peers is exceptionally important for your learning to get consolidated in your brain.
Exactly. Sometimes in classrooms also, like when I had my, if I talk about economics class that I had the past year, there might be some questions that I might not even think of ever, but then they might be asked in the class, and therefore I would gain perspective on those topics as well. So I think that's how school plays a very important role, because you tend to also think in a direction which you might not have if you were doing it on your own.
Yeah, yeah,
All
yeah.
Okay. We see governments moving on. We see governments today more than ever before trying to regulate the cost of education. On one hand, and at the same time, we see that there is an increase in aspiration of better education, better teaching competencies, and better infrastructure for the students, and something that parents also push for. How do you think education providers can meet these aspirations of quality education at an optimum cost? And do you potentially see a transformation of how education will be delivered and newer business models will be coming up?
Uh, it's quite a complex question.
Two, three questions in one.
Yeah, so of course, regulation is important. That's the first thing.
Yes.
Like in any industry, and it's good that the government regulates accountability, applying to sticking to laws, for example, etc. So that's a good thing. I think any good school will have to adhere to those regulations.
Yeah.
Second, you question around changing business models. Absolutely, I think business models will change with advent of technology. Like I don't know, post COVID, do schools need such large land and building?
Yeah.
Do they need so many school buses, for example? When children can be in a hybrid format, why do you need children to come in and go? We don't need to.
But sir, don't you
Children can learn.
having school? So, like, I'll be very honest. So, online school, there's also a drawback where you have kids actually being involved in other things at the same time. So, they might show that they're on screen, but might sometimes the cameras will be off, and sometimes if the cameras are also off, then or still on, then you might be on another website and you might be portraying that you're listening, but you're actually not listening, and you might be doing other stuff. So, don't you think in that point, actually having school becomes more necessary? Coming to school.
Yeah, I'm absolutely right. I'm not saying school coming back is not going to happen. Of course, it will happen. There'll always be a need for children to come back and meet friends, meet the teacher, work together, have a conversation in a small group in a physical sense. But that's not because students will do stuff at home. They'll switch off camera. There are always technology solutions to those issues.
Yeah.
In fact, the larger issue when a student is not watching the cam or not attending the class doing something else is engagement.
Yeah.
Then the teacher has to figure out why is it. But by the way, that happens even in physical classes. Why, if the student doesn't want to listen, that student will do something else. So
That's
those are pedagogical challenges that teacher needs to tackle. It's got nothing to do with online or physical. Of course, in online it's far more acute because you just have the flexibility to watch a Netflix movie in another screen as you are sitting in a classroom, which you can't do in it. In my time, I can probably have my lunch, play a video game, and still listen to the class. That was how talented I was, and teacher can still not catch me. Uh, so uh, uh, so
it
I don't know.
was just different.
Online learning is going to solve the problem, or it's going to promote such behaviors. A talented student like me can still do it in a physical class also.
Yes.
Uh, yeah. So, but those models will change. So today, when I have to create a new school, I often wonder, why do you have to spend so much money on so many classrooms and so many school buses. We can save money for parents, make cost optimum in it. Like for example, maybe 5 years from now, parents and students, especially in middle and high school, I have a sense that they don't want to come every day. Let's say, for example, a student like yours will say, hey, I've got a job in Ernst & Young or PricewaterhouseCoopers as an internship. I need to go there 3 days a week, but I just want to do school for 3 days a week and 3 days I'm going to work. Why not? Why do you need to wait till your college or after your college to do internships, for example? And if you're going to come to school only 3 days a week, why do I need to have 100 classrooms? I can just build 50 classrooms, save the money, and pass on the savings to the parents. So that's how the price of education is going to come down.
Yes.
Today, the biggest expense for a school to set up is, you would know, land is expensive.
Yes.
Infrastructure is expensive. It is exceptionally expensive in a city like Gurgaon or any city in the country to put up land. Of course, parents might feel why is school fees so high, but the fact is, to set up a school, the land is also very high. It's not cheap anywhere in the country to have one. So the point I'm trying to make is, yeah, there are better optimum models. Our dependence on infrastructure will come down, hence the price will also come.
All right. Moving on. Corporate is laggard in India. For do you think is the reason and what can be done to leverage the full potential of corporate leadership when it comes to the education sector?
That's another question I don't agree upon, because I don't agree that corporate partnership is important in education. In fact, in the past, any corporate partnership, education has not really worked well. In it, like the West is a great example where there is a lot more instances of corporate partnerships, like Microsoft, Apple, Google, or any. In fact, many companies have actually got into setting up schools or influencing policy, etc. Whenever large corporates have got into education, it has either resulted in their own business interests getting expanded, or corporates are not experts in education. Teachers are. So if you allow a Coke or Coca-Cola to set up the curriculum, of course, Coca-Cola is going to say in your midday lunch program, why don't you offer soda or something, which happened, by the way, in the past. McDonald's wanted to set up, McDonald's still has a partnership with many districts in the US. Of course, now it's come down because of a lot of activism by citizens. But yeah, if you allow McDonald's to set up schools, of course, it's going to have nice burgers and French fries as part of the lunch. Nor will it actively encourage students to think about what good eating habits are. So there's one reason why corporate partnership is not necessarily a good thing. The second reason also that corporates are not experts in education. So when you get generalists to decide on education, they normally don't do a good job, because the people most suited to make reform in education are the stakeholders, which is the teachers, students, and the parents. But you have a corporate to come and tell them what to do, then it really doesn't help in the past. But having said that, there have also been very good examples of corporates, especially around funding, like the Bill and the Gates Foundation, for example, Bill and the Melinda Gates Foundation. It's not technically a corporate, but it's a corporate endowment fund which is invested heavily into education around the world, not in India, but outside the country, and had some significant results. So you've got to be very careful of when you allow a corporate, when you shouldn't be allowing a corporate in it. In India, I know a lot of large corporate houses fund good quality education. Like our own heritage school used to get fund from Wipro, which is one of the top technology companies in the country, for teacher development, for example. So that's a great partnership we had. They provided funds, but they allowed us to choose how to spend that fund. Yes. On teacher education, etc. So those kind of arrangements are good. But otherwise, I'm not a big fan of corporates getting into it. I do like the idea of corporates investing in setting up more schools, of course. Like I know HDFC Bank, for example, has set up about 4 or 5 schools. So that's led to more competition, more quality of education, which is a good thing. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. Moving on to the last 2 questions that I have. Do you think governments have made education a priority, considering the insignificant amount of budget that has been allocated? Like we spend only 3% of our GDP on education against the aim of at least six for the last 5 decades that our government has set. Some of the states, such as Delhi, have taken a lead, and we see that there are certain positive results that are coming out of it. Considering resources are the competitive advantage for the country, what do you think the governments must do to make education their priority? I mean, we saw the military had a huge budget this year. um, Even though it's not wrong, it is important. National defense is of utmost importance, but education is also something that builds the entire economy, that actually sets it apart and creates wealth creation and then leads to the increase in GDP. So do you think it is uh, of importance? Obviously it is. And like, what do you think the government needs to do in order to make it better?
So again, a very important part of this conversation. So first thing first, there is no country in this world which has become a developed nation without significantly allocating resources towards education.
Yes.
No country has ever done that. In fact, countries which have gotten rich only after many decades of investment in education and improving the quality of human capital. Just reading Japan at the turn of this century, when it became a superpower
Yeah.
just before the World War I, it went through something called the Meiji Restoration. During the heights of Meiji Restoration, up to 70% of their income at the state level was spent on education. It just stunned me. We're talking about 3%, 4% in our country, but Japan at one point in time spent that kind of money. And that's true of many of the Nordic Scandinavian nations. Even now, they spend an inordinate portion of their national income on education. Uh, the, the US, for example, spends significantly higher. Even many developing nations, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines, these are countries which are much more richer than us at the GDP per capita level. They also show significant higher investments in education. So that's one part of the that's one part of the context. Another thing which we also have to remember that we have to recognize that India does not have the money to spend on education. It's not the lack of will or intent; it's just the lack of resources. India does not get enough income in the first to begin with. We hardly have 2 to 3% of people paying taxes,
Yes.
right? We are an abysmally poor nation in it. Our income levels are not so high. For a large nation like ourselves, we should probably be having 10 to 11% of tax collection. We don't have that yet. We're getting there. Our tax collections are getting better in the last 7, 8 years. But we clearly nowhere close to where our income should be. It's going to take a long while. So to criticize the government that why aren't you spending 6% as against 3%? Where will the government find the money, right? In fact, our government is so, I often say this in many of the other talk shows or interviews, that our government spends 7% on pensions and 3% on education, which essentially means that it probably spends more money on the old than on the new and the future. But you can't stop paying pensions either, right? In fact, this problem is going to get even more acute post COVID because now the government's priority in the next 5 years is to augment the health infrastructure, which is again equally worse, like the way education sector is because of legacy reasons. Uh, we are never a country designed for large oxygen plants, ambulance services in every village. No, we've never been that way. In it. In fact, the number of doctors per 1,000 people is so low. You can't create doctors overnight. It takes 20 years to create doctors. It takes 20 years to create this kind of infrastructure. So the government's priority in the next 5, 10 years is going to be health. It's not going to be education. So the only solution to bridge the 3% gap which we have in terms of education investment is private entrepreneurs. So don't expect the government to bring in the 3%. That's not going to happen. It's like expecting the government to build apartments for everybody. It's not going to happen. Expecting the government to build our airports. It's not going to happen. You have a fancy Delhi airport, not because the government could put that money. You do that because you have a great private entrepreneur, private enterprise setting it up, right? And that's why competition is important. Allowing businesses, embracing the idea of business and education is also important. That allowing private people, entrepreneurs, well-meaning individuals with regulation set up So the 3% money is government can't provide, but allow private entrepreneurs to put that money in it.
That's true. Okay, coming to the last question of the interview. Now, we've really spoken a lot about RTE, which is the Right to Education Act. Now, despite India passing that Right to Education Act, we see that there's a disproportionate level of education demographically in India. What policy decisions and structural changes can help realize the dream of uniform and quality education to all in India? What do you think? What are certain
So one, RT is not effective for many reasons. One, the way the law has been. See, India has a very, it's a very complex country because there are multiple states, and education is the concurrent, which means it's a responsibility of the center, but largely of the state government. So
Yeah.
every state, there's only so much the government of India can do.
Yes.
Much of education is determined by the state in which the school is in it. So RT's effectiveness is varying across states. Some states do well, some states don't do well. You talked about Delhi, for example. Delhi has been fairly successful in RT, but I should tell you, Delhi is a rare exception. One of the reasons why Delhi can get away with high budgetary allocations to education, because Delhi doesn't have any expense.
Yeah.
It's a state run by the central government. In fact, it is a very unique situation where the rest of the country pays for the metros that Delhi has.
Yeah.
Like if I'm in Chennai or in Bangalore, I'll be wondering why would I have to pay my taxes towards Delhi? But that's what is happening right now. Hence, Delhi has money to spend on education. It's not the other way around. So Delhi is unique. We can't look at Delhi as an example for others. But Delhi still has done reasonably good work on RT in terms of enrollments. So people are more aware in Delhi, for example, of the existing laws. They're able to apply. Like in Gurgaon, a lot of parents are not even aware of RT.
Yeah.
And even if they are aware, it's another thing. Also, the government also don't. They've fairly not been very effective in terms of supporting schools to give RT. For example, one of the laws is that if you have an RT kid, the government is supposed to pay some money to schools. Like, of course, schools like Heritage don't take money from the government. In fact, none of our RT kids, we take any reimbursement from the government. But that's not the case for another school. They badly need that money from the government to pay this, meet their expenses, pay the staff. But if their money doesn't come on time, they won't be able to honor those RT admissions. So I think the government, one, has to strengthen the RT itself. Second, more than this, like I said, the best way to education to reform is to allow competition, allow private people, allow more schools to come. And when that happens, you automatically will see RT also being implemented more effectively.
All right. With this, I come to the end of the interview. Thank you so much for being a part of this. You actually gave us a lot of insights, certain things that I never even thought of while I was even preparing this questionnaire. To end this, do you have any last thoughts that you would want to share with the people who might be watching this interview? Anything?
Yeah, one thought which I often tell when I meet young people, I've been doing it the last 10 years. India is a country with great potential.
Yes.
Anybody who bets on the potential of India will be tremendously rewarded spiritually, monetarily, in every aspect. Uh, this is a large market with multiple opportunities. And I often tell young people is that if you really want to make a contribution to the nation and in the process also create value for yourself, education is a great field. And I strongly and actively encourage young people to think about sitting organizations, institutions, schools, technology companies to solve the challenge of education. And if you and you will be successful. There is abundant opportunities available here. Don't go work for somebody else and sell your brain for peanuts. Start something on your own, especially in education. Your rewards will be phenomenal, and not to mention the abundant satisfaction you would experience in knowing that you've transformed lives of a million children.
All right. Thank you so much. And everyone who's watching, thank you so much. Please do like, share, comment, and subscribe to my channel for more such interviews. Thank you so much. Thank you for being yourself.
Take care, Gurjot. Thank you so much for the opportunity.